Hi, Sarah Childers back with you. And I'm so sorry it's been a while since I've made a video. I've been kind of obsessed with creating these seminars for high school students, but there has been this idea that's been nagging at me, nagging at me, nagging at me since I saw Night of the Hunter. And so here I am with some thoughts on Night of the Hunter because I miss doing this. I miss you. And I want to just thank the folks who have hung in there with me and to thank the new subscribers because honestly, y'all are the ones who inspire me to do this. And I love doing it. So thank you. Thank you for the inspiration. But anyway, I want to get on with Night of the Hunter because it's so exciting because I think it's just like a fantastic film, but also it struck me. I mean, isn't it cool? Like when you watch films that you've seen before, but you watch them at a different time in your life and maybe with a difference, like something going through your head, a different context or something, then all of a sudden you notice something brand new in the film that you've never noticed before. And for me with Night of the Hunter, it was, oh my gosh, I can't believe how much Charles Laughton is really giving us an exploration in this film of what it means to be a woman, what it means to live in society as a woman, and the different kind of social pressures that women face. And some are able to face those and become stronger, and others are defeated by them. But I was really interested in the way that the kind of primary fairy tale story involving the two children also is a kind of pan to the dangers of fairy tale. So, you know, as the river is such a prominent part of the film, the idea that there's kind of this surface narrative that we follow and we know so well, but there's also this kind of undercurrent that really, for me, was just such a fascinating exploration of what it means to be a woman. And so this is 1955, and it's like I don't know many films from 1955 that do that kind of exploration that aren't melodramas. Now, for those of you who know me, you know I'm a melodrama sucker. I love melodrama. And one of my favorite melodramas from this particular era, which is Douglas Sirk's All That Heaven Allows, actually came out the same year that Night of the Hunter did. But Night of the Hunter, in comparison, seems like much more of a stone cold noir. I mean, it really is very German expressionist influenced, and it does have those kind of like dark noir forces and explorations and currents. I mean, really, if we think about it, the narrative thread of the film is a kind of noir fairy tale Bible story of innocent children endangered by dark forces, and the whole dark forces thing is very noir. But there's a lot more going on. So I'm talking a lot about the women. So what the heck do I mean about that? Okay, so let's look specifically at two women, Willa Harper and Rachel Cooper, to see why I'm thinking what I'm thinking. Okay, let's start with Willa Harper first. So Willa Harper, who we meet very early on in the film, let's just think about her. She's a desirable woman. Shelley Winters, yes, desirable woman. And she's desirable because she's attractive, she's of a prime age, she's flirtatious, she's clearly fertile, she's capable. I mean, she is keeping her children clothed and fed. She is working within the community. But we also see that Willa is very vulnerable and also very malleable. So from the outset, we see her energies focused in one direction, and that's really finding a husband, a man who will take care of her and her children. That's what we see, but we also see, I mean, and that's so, okay, define what you mean by that's what we see. That's what we see in that we see her energies focused in that direction by people outside of her. When we actually see Willa present something that she's interested in or actually express her own desire, we see that she's interested not just in finding a husband, but finding love, and also finding the opportunity or being presented with the opportunity or the space to express her love sexually. But her kind of personal drives and desires really become distorted and really subsumed by the forces that surround her and that are really pushing her in a very particular direction. And so if we think about one of the primary forces that we see, it is Icy Spoon. And in fact, I didn't realize that Icy, I-C-E-Y, is the first name of Miss Spoon, the sort of gray-haired, shall we say it, Gorgon, who Willow works for, who is one of the spoons of of the spoons, like the ice cream parlor candy shop where Willa works. And she is kind of your textbook castrating female. And she castrates everyone, including Willa. But she's constantly reminding Willa of how she has to find a husband, and she has to do so quickly. And what she does to do that is she's constantly crafting narratives that warn Willa about a multitude of dangers: financial insecurity, her fading attractiveness, since in her mind, attractiveness is a woman's primary power because it's her ability to find a husband that will like basically take care of all our troubles. And she's also constantly reminding Willa of the fickleness of men who have so many women that they can choose from that, you know, she better act fast and get her hooks in, you know, the the nearest eligible man, or she's going to be SOL. Sorrowfully out of luck. And so basically what Icy is doing is creating this kind of grim fairy tale that she repeats constantly in order to force Willa into marriage with Harry, who just happens to show up as the most eligible bachelor in town. And we know why he's there. And it's not because he's interested in settling down. So if this were a fairy tale, then Willa should be living a happily ever after life after she marries Harry. But after she marries Harry, she enters what we might call a kind of hellscape. And I'm using that word hellscape because Harry's so like into Bible stories, but using them for hellacious, you know, it's kind of like, what is it? The devil can imitate. Gosh, you can tell I haven't been to Sunday school or Bible study in a long time. But anyway, I think there's something about the devil being able to use scripture to his own purposes. But anyway, the whole point that I want to make here is that one of the things that Laughton is showing us is that since we are in a very fairy tale kind of film, that so few fairy tales actually show us what happens after the wedding, because it's kind of like they get married and then they live happily ever after. Now here we skip the wedding and go right to the marriage, and we see that sometimes the happily ever after actually isn't happily ever after, it's kind of horribly ever after. And so we see Willa, so innocent, so trusting, and so hungry for love. And in fact, she becomes a kind of grown-up version of Ruby, whom we meet later on in the Rachel Cooper section of the film. But poor Willa, she's really quickly crushed by Harry, who is immediately after they get married, disgusted and expresses his disgust for her sexual desire for him, and immediately sets about trying to get Willa to feel disgusted by it too. And he's successful in that. And in fact, now that I'm thinking about it, we could see Harry as embodying a version of power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, since he has been placed by society, by the local community, by Icy, in a position of complete control over Willa and her children. Now, culture tells us that there's this kind of, I mean, culture tells us there's this fairy tale, or at least culture tells women. Culture told my mother, who told me that there's kind of a fairy tale way that women can live in the world. And that is all about really kind of putting yourself in the, not so much in the control of others, but under the protection of others who will take care of you and all will be well. And generally sort of ceding your agency, ceding your control over your own life to this kind of benevolent patriarch. I mean, that's it. It's supposed to be benevolent. Like, you know, he will come, the prince will come and rescue you, and then he will take care of you and all will be well. And you'll, like, I don't know, eat bonbons and live in a castle, whatever. But anyway, once a woman has a husband and a father for her children, if she has children or wants to beget children, then all will be well. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's not true. But we can see in Harry a very grim fairy tale, kind of the sadly ever after or the horribly ever after version of the story, because he emotionally and psychologically manipulates Willa and the equally pliable Pearl to bend them to his quest. And he also physically abuses and alienates John to the same end. And I don't know about y'all, but I happen to have had a stepfather that it wasn't quite as bad as Harry, but he looms pretty large in my like evil villain part of my own personal fairy tale. So maybe that's why I'm kind of seeing Harry in this particular way. So pardon me for that. but we see we see what we know in films, which, by the way, reminds me, I just saw Official Competition last night. And for those of you who haven't seen it yet, if you can find it on streaming, it's definitely worth a look, especially for those of you who are interested in films and kind of meta films. I mean, it's not the best film in the world, but there's some interesting points and there's a really interesting twist. But I digress, as I often do. So anyway, la la la, Harry, Willa not living happily ever after, Harry being the grim fairy tale of what happens when one gives oneself over to this kind of benevolent fairy tale, which is actually a fairy tale. But anyway, something really interesting happens within the film and within their marriage when the power dynamic shifts. And that is when Willa finds the truth out about Harry. And Harry knows that she's found out the truth about him and confronts her. So in this moment, she has the power, like a very definite version of power. And that's why Harry tries to physically dominate her, to put her back into her place. But that's not what's unusual, because we see that kind of dynamic all the time. What we're not used to seeing, and not used to seeing especially in non-melodrama films, is a woman who consciously puts herself back into her subordinate position. And in part, we see Willa doing this by grasping at fairy tales. And she wants them to be true. She wants them to be true as a way to falsify the reality of her current, more grim situations. And so in that way, Laughton shows us the danger of fairy tales and holding on to them in one of the most gorgeously horrifying German expressionist influenced scenes arguably ever filmed. And so I'm going to try to show a part of that scene here. Hopefully YouTube will let me sneak that in.
You were listening outside the parlor window.
It ain't in the river, is it, Harry?
Answer me.
Ben never told you he threw it in the river, did he? The children know where it's hid. John knows. Is that it, Harry? But it's still here amongst us, tainting us. You must have known about it all along, Harry. But that ain't the reason why you married me. I know that much. Because the largest wouldn't let it be. He made you marry me so you could show me the way in the life and the salvation of my soul. Ain't that so, Harry? So you might say that it was the money that brung us together. The rest of it don't matter.
Okay, so there we have a very chilling scene that shows that maybe it's not such a good idea to hold on to certain narratives. Yeah, okay, I'll say no more. But okay, so there's Willa, and certainly she provides us with what we might call a negative role model. But Laughton doesn't stop there. I mean, he's gotten us to pretty much the halfway point of the film. It's kind of, perhaps it's an inciting incident, certainly is for John and Pearl, but he doesn't leave us there. He doesn't just leave us with a negative female role model, or a couple if we throw Icy in. We also are presented, as the film continues, with a positive role model. And that comes in the form of Rachel Cooper, who we're reintroduced to. And Rachel Cooper really exemplifies strength and independence, and does so in a uniquely feminine form, because we often see female strength on screen represented as a version of masculine strength, people able to, women able to talk tough and be strong and like use violence, just the way men use violence, that they're basically just the masculinity in a female body. But what's so cool about Rachel Cooper, in my opinion, is that she really does present us with a uniquely feminine source of strength, or feminine definition or conceptualization of strength, because her strength comes from her knowledge and experience, basically from her life, from her lived experience. And so there's a couple of characteristics that really come to the fore that I think are unique to her female experience and to her character's experience. So for example, we see her being very resourceful. So she figures out herself, using her mind and her abilities and her skills, how to financially support not only herself, but essentially a house full of, sadly, abandoned, unwanted children who parents either are dead or aren't able to support them. And she takes care of them, and all during the Great Depression, and she does it quite well. And we see her using her garden and her chickens and her other sort of domestic skills in order to bring in the money that they need to survive, as well as feeding them from those resources as well. And we also see when she goes to town that no one in town tells her that she needs to do anything any differently. And I can imagine that if Icy Spoon came up and told her that she needed a man, that she would tell Icy Spoon in no uncertain terms that no, she does not. So she's resourceful and self-sufficient. We also see that she's sincerely loving. It's kind of a version of maybe tough love, we might call it, but she really does show each of the children that she loves them for who they are, that she accepts their weaknesses, their challenges, their individual eccentricities or quirks, but she loves them nonetheless, and she works with them, and she really does nurture their individuality and who they are in a really lovely and beautiful way. She also knows people. She clearly sniffs out the threat that Harry poses when he darkens her door. And what's so cool is that, we could often say, oh, it's women's intuition, which is really a way of denigrating a person's intuition, their ability to read and take in information and create an interpretation from that. But what Laughton does is kind of universalizes this intuition and makes it something really powerful, because Rachel is able to see something that other people miss, or that only a few people are able to see, which is that Harry is a wolf in sheep's clothing. And so she's able to see through that false patina that he's put on top of himself, and also see through the stories that he tells as being evil, false stories. Also, and perhaps last but not least, her fealty to the Bible and Christian teachings. So this is really directly counter to Willa, who becomes almost like we might say a slave to them, who accepts them without question, accepts them like uncritically, and just kind of enacts Harry's version of those. So she's kind of like taking it in a secondary way and not doing her own kind of critical thinking about it. But Rachel is totally like, she's in it, she's thought about them, she's lived it. And so not only is she a counterexample to Willa's relationship to the Bible and to scripture, but also she counters Harry's perversions of these things. So she uses them as an actual moral lens, as a call to action, versus, Harry uses them as a justification, or as a, the sheep's clothing, as the shield, the camouflage that he operates like in his evil ways behind. And so Rachel Cooper's kind of using it as a call for her own just action. She even at the end of the film presents her kind of moral compass as a call to action for viewers as well. And so in this way, she becomes kind of a Christian soldier who brings moral action into the world, not only into the world of the film, but the way Laughton sets it up, also potentially into the IRL, into our world as well. And so she is a woman who models a strong and independent femininity. She's a force of light who certainly counters the darkness. And this, again, very noir, very melodrama, very Grand Guignol, very Manichaean, but still, it works, good versus evil. But what's even more important is that she's a woman capable of shaping the world rather than being shaped by it, and certainly shaped negatively by it. And so this is why, in my opinion, she's a rare and beautiful female character. And I'm so grateful to Laughton for giving her to us. And, honestly, for giving us Willa too, because we can learn a lot from both of them. So I'm so grateful to Laughton, and I'm so grateful to you for perhaps sticking around to hear all of my current diatribe on what I'm thinking about Night of the Hunter. But anyway, I'm going to close for now, and I will be back soon with something else. Thanks for watching.